the old bluesman said. "Play something, son." Jimi Hendrix played one chord. And everyone in that room watched 30 years of mastery collapse in the old man's eyes. Chicago. Winter 1967. A small room above a blues club on the south side. No stage. No audience. Just wooden floors, a space heater struggling against the cold, and 7 people who would carry this moment for the rest of their lives. The old man's name was Samuel Reed. Nobody called him Samuel. Everyone knew him as Memphis Sam. A guitar player who'd been working the Chicago blues circuit since before most people in that room were born. He'd played with Muddy Waters. He'd backed Howlin' Wolf. He'd taught half the session players in the city. His hands knew every blues lick, every turnaround, every trick that had been passed down through generations of black musicians who'd carried their guitars north from the Delta. Memphis Sam didn't play for fame. He played because that's what he did. That's who he was. 33 years he'd been playing professionally. 33 years of smoky clubs and late nights, and knowing, absolutely knowing, that he understood the blues better than most people who picked up a guitar. He sat in his usual chair, his Gibson hollow body across his lap, wearing the same worn suit jacket he'd been wearing to gigs since 1959. Around him, a handful of younger musicians. Session players, studio cats, people who'd come to Memphis Sam's informal gatherings to learn, to listen, to absorb the knowledge of someone who'd been there when the Chicago sound was being born. And then there was Jimi Hendrix, 24 years old. Sitting on the floor with his back against the wall, Stratocaster resting across his legs. He'd been in Chicago for 3 days, playing the Kinetic Playground, and someone, nobody could remember who exactly, had suggested he stop by one of Memphis Sam's sessions. Memphis Sam had heard of Hendrix. Everybody had heard of him by late 1967. The English boy. The one making noise in London. The one playing guitar with his teeth, setting it on fire, all that showmanship nonsense that Sam considered more circus than music. "So you're the one they're all talking about," Sam had said when Jimmy walked in, his tone neutral but his eyes assessing. "The one playing all that loud stuff." Jimmy had smiled slightly, that gentle smile that people who only knew his stage persona never expected. "I play what feels right, sir." "Sir?" Memphis Sam had liked that. Respect. The kid had manners at least. They'd been sitting there for maybe 20 minutes. Sam had been demonstrating a particular voicing, a diminished chord he'd learned from Tampa Red back in '38. The younger musicians were leaning in, watching his fingers, trying to absorb the knowledge. Jimmy sat quietly, not playing, just listening. Watching. His Stratocaster silent across his lap. Memphis Sam noticed. He always noticed when someone wasn't playing. "You just gonna sit there, son?" Sam asked, looking at Jimmy directly. "Or you gonna show us what all the fuss is about?" The room got quiet. Not tense. Just attentive. Everyone could feel the shift. Jimmy looked up, his eyes meeting Sam's. "I'm learning, sir." "Just listening." "Learning what?" "You're supposed to be this big new thing. What you got to learn from an old man playing old songs?" It wasn't hostile. Not quite. But there was challenge in it. The gentle, almost polite challenge of someone who'd spent 3 decades being the best and wasn't quite ready to believe that something fundamentally new could exist. Hendrix didn't raise his voice. He never needed to. Jimmy shifted slightly, adjusting the Stratocaster in his lap. "Everything, sir. There's everything to learn." Memphis Sam smiled, but it wasn't entirely warm. "Well then, let's hear what you got. Play me something." The younger musicians glanced at each other. This was it. The moment they talk about later. Memphis Sam versus Jimi Hendrix. Old school versus new. Chicago blues versus whatever Jimi Hendrix was. Jimmy looked down at his guitar. His fingers moved to the neck, finding position. The room held its breath. And then he played one chord. Not a riff. Not a solo. Not a demonstration of speed or technique, or any of the pyrotechnics people expected from Jimi Hendrix. One chord. But the way he played it. His thumb wrapped around the neck, fretting the low E. His fingers spread across the fretboard in a position that shouldn't have worked, that violated every traditional fingering Memphis Sam had ever taught. And when he struck the strings, the sound that came out was impossible. It was a chord. Recognizable as a chord. But it contained something that shouldn't have been there. Multiple tonalities existing simultaneously. The major and minor fighting and resolving in the same instant. Overtones that seemed to come from nowhere, creating a halo of sound around the fundamental notes. Memphis Sam's fingers froze on his own guitar. The room didn't breathe. Jimi held the chord, letting it sustain, and then, still without changing his fretting hand position, he moved his picking hand slightly, changing his attack angle by maybe 15 degrees, and the entire character of the chord transformed. Same notes. Different universe. He did it again. Same fretting. Different angle. Different cosmos. Then he stopped. Lifted his fingers. Silence. He looked at Memphis Sam and said, very quietly, "That's what I'm trying to understand, sir. How one thing can be many things." Memphis Sam stared at his own guitar. At his own hands. At the instrument he'd been playing for 33 years and thought he understood completely. His mouth opened slightly. Closed. Opened again. One of the younger musicians started to say something. Sam held up his hand. "Stop. Don't." The silence stretched. 10 seconds. 20. 30. In that quiet moment, Hendrix did something no one expected. Jimi leaned forward slightly. "Would you show me that diminished voicing again, Mr. Reed? I didn't quite catch the fingering." Memphis Sam looked up sharply. The kid was serious. After what he just played, that impossible chord that somehow rewrote the laws of harmony, he was asking Memphis Sam to teach him something. It wasn't pity. It wasn't condescension. It was genuine. Sam's hands were shaking slightly. He looked down at them, surprised by the tremor. 33 years and his hands had never shaken. "That chord you just played," Sam said, his voice rougher than usual. How did you even think to put your fingers like that?" Jimi glanced at his guitar, then back at Sam. "I heard it first, sir. In my head. Then I tried to find it. Took me about 2 months to figure out the fingering." 2 months. For one chord. "Yes, sir." Memphis Sam was quiet again. Then, "Play it again. Slower this time. I want to see." Jimi did. Even slower. His fingers moving to that impossible position. The thumb wrapped around. The angle that shouldn't work. The strike that created multiple universes. Sam watched every millimeter of movement. His eyes, the eyes that had seen Muddy Waters play, that had watched Robert Nighthawk's fingers, that had absorbed 3 decades of blues mastery, were watching something he'd never seen before. When the chord faded, Sam set his own guitar down. Gently. Deliberately. On the floor beside his chair. The younger musicians tensed. Was he angry? Was he about to leave? Memphis Sam looked at Jimi Hendrix for a long moment. Then he did something that would be remembered by everyone in that room for the rest of their lives. He stood up. Walked over to where Jimi sat on the floor. And extended his hand. Jimi looked up, uncertain, and took it. Sam pulled him to his feet. They stood face to face, the old bluesman and the young revolutionary. "You're not playing blues," Sam said. Jimi's face showed a flicker of something, not hurt, but acknowledgement. "No, sir. I guess I'm not. You're playing something else. Something I don't have a name for." Sam paused. "Something I don't know how to play." The room was so quiet you could hear the space heater clicking. "But you know what that chord told me, son?" "What's that, sir?" "It told me I'd been playing the same thing for 33 years. I'd been playing it beautifully. I'd been playing it righteously. But I'd been playing the same thing." Sam's voice wasn't bitter. It was wondering. Amazed. You played one chord and showed me there's a whole other language I never even knew existed. Subscribe and leave a comment, because the meaning of this moment is still unfolding." Jimi shook his head slowly. "Mr. Reed, you know things I'll spend my whole life trying to learn. That diminished voicing, the way you voiced it had history in it. Had generations in it. I can play strange chords all day, but I can't make them say what your chords say. Then we teach each other," Sam said simply. What happened next lasted 6 hours. Memphis Sam sat back down. Jimi sat across from him. And they played. Sam showed Jimi voicings that came from Tampa Red, from Lonnie Johnson, from players whose names had been forgotten but whose sounds lived on in Sam's fingers. He showed him the patience of the blues, how to let one note breathe, how to make space matter as much as sound. Jimi showed Sam harmonic possibilities that shouldn't exist. He showed him how to think of the guitar not as a blues instrument, or a rock instrument, but as a tool for finding sounds that lived in your head and nowhere else. He played chords that made Sam laugh out loud, not mockingly, but with pure delight at the audacity of them. The younger musicians watched in silence. Nobody played. Nobody interrupted. They just witnessed. Around 3 a.m., Sam tried to play that chord, Jimi's impossible chord. His fingers couldn't quite make the stretch. His hand had been shaped by 33 years of traditional positioning. "Can't quite get there," Sam admitted, smiling ruefully. "Doesn't matter," Jimi said. "You showed me something better. You showed me why that chord needs to breathe before it speaks. I've been playing it too fast." Sam looked at him. "You were listening that carefully?" "Always, sir." As dawn started to gray the windows, Memphis Sam stood up stiffly, his back protesting the hours of sitting. He looked at his Gibson, still on the floor where he'd set it down hours ago. "I'm going to practice different tomorrow," he said, almost to himself. "Going to stop assuming I know what comes next." Jimi stood too, cradling his Stratocaster. "Will you show me more? When I'm back in Chicago? If you show me more of those impossible chords." They shook hands again. Longer this time. The younger musicians started to gather their things, knowing they'd just witnessed something that would become a story they'd tell for decades. As Jimi was leaving, Memphis Sam called after him. "Hey, son." Jimi turned. "Thank you," Sam said quietly. "For not making me feel small. You could have. But you didn't." Jimi's smile was gentle, genuine. "You gave me the greatest gift, Mr. Reed. You let me show you something new without making me prove I had the right. That's mastery. Real mastery." What followed stayed with everyone in the room, long after the last note faded. Memphis Sam went back to playing the Chicago blues circuit. But something had changed. Other musicians noticed. He started incorporating strange voicings. Started leaving more space. Started asking questions instead of always having answers. Memphis Sam got weird. Some of the old-timers said. Memphis Sam got curious. The younger players said. He never could play that chord exactly the way Jimi played it. His hands wouldn't bend that way. But he found his own version, a voicing that honored where he'd come from while acknowledging there were territories he'd never explored. Jimi died 3 years later. 1970, 27 years old. When Memphis Sam heard the news, he was in his apartment on the south side. He picked up his Gibson, sat in his chair, and tried to play that chord. His version of it. The version his hands could manage. He played it once. Let it sustain until the room was silent again. Then he whispered, "Thank you, son, for showing an old man he could still learn." Memphis Sam kept playing until he was 78 years old. But he never again claimed to know everything about the guitar. When young players came to learn from him, he'd tell them about that winter night in 1967. "Real mastery," he'd say, "isn't making someone feel small when you're better. It's making them feel possible when they show you something you never imagined." Share and subscribe. Some stories deserve to be remembered. The Gibson that Memphis Sam played that night is in a museum now. Next to it, A small card with a quote Sam gave in an interview in 1985. Jimi Hendrix played me one chord and taught me that being great means staying humble enough to be surprised. I thought I knew the blues. He showed me I'd only been playing one dialect of an infinite language. The chord became known among Chicago session players as the Reed voicing, Memphis Sam's adaptation of something impossible, made possible through humility. Mastery isn't about domination. It's about transformation. And sometimes it only takes one chord.